Tune in for a tale, words that set sail.
Digital Splendor, Literature Illuminated.
All right, let's dive into one of the most powerful books ever written, Adam Smith's The Wealth of Nations. We're on a hunt for the one core idea that literally changed the world. And spoiler alert, it's not about gold or armies or kings. It's about something you see every single day, but maybe you've never really thought about it. So the whole book kicks off with this huge, fundamental puzzle. Why are some countries just swimming in prosperity while others can barely stay afloat? For Adam Smith, this wasn't just some boring academic exercise. It was about figuring out the very engine of human progress. And Smith really puts a fine point on it. Now, using the language of his time, he points out that even the poorest worker in a thriving, modern nation has a better life, more comforts, more stuff, than even the most powerful chief in a hunter-gatherer society. So the big question for him was, how is that possible? What creates that massive gap in well-being? Well, Smith argued the answer wasn't what everyone thought. It wasn't about conquering new lands or hoarding gold. Nope. It was something way more subtle, something that unlocks the hidden power inside of human labor itself. And here it is. The secret, the whole key, according to Smith, is the division of labor. You know, what we'd call specialization today. He basically said that all the incredible improvements in our ability to produce things, well, they all come from this one simple concept. It sounds simple, right? But its effects were absolutely world-changing. To make this idea less abstract and really hit home, Smith takes us on a little field trip to a pin factory of all places. It sounds kind of boring, but what he saw there explains pretty much everything about our modern economy. And this is where things get really wild. On the left, picture one guy trying to make a pin all by himself. Smith figured that working as hard as he could, he might make a single pin in a whole day. But on the right, you take 10 workers and give each one a specialized job, and the amount they produce just explodes. 48,000. Just think about that for a second. We went from 1 pin per person to 4,800 pins per person. That's not a small improvement. That's a complete revolution in productivity. You've got the same 10 people, but by changing how they work, you unleash this unbelievable potential. So how on earth did they do it? Well, they broke the job down. Making one little pin was actually about 18 separate steps. So one guy just draws the wire. Another person's entire job is to straighten it. A third just cuts it. Each worker becomes a master of one tiny piece of the puzzle, and together they create this incredibly efficient assembly line. Okay, so we've seen what happened, but the bigger question is why? Why does breaking down a task have such a massive effect? Well, Smith boiled it down to 3 main reasons. First off, dexterity. It just makes sense, right? If your only job is to do one simple thing over and over and over again, you get ridiculously good at it. Your hands just know what to do. It becomes muscle memory. You get faster, you make fewer mistakes, and your skill level goes through the roof. Second, you save a ton of time. Think about the lone worker. He'd have to put down his wire drawing tool, walk over to the cutting station, pick up a different tool. All that time spent switching between tasks is time you're not actually making anything. In the factory, there's no switching. Every second is a second spent producing. And third, and this one might be the most brilliant of all, it actually sparks innovation. When your entire world is focused on one tiny step in a process, you can't help but think of ways to make it easier or faster. Smith tells this great little story about a kid whose job was just opening and closing a valve. He got bored, so he figured out how to tie a rope to another part of the machine so it would open and close the valve automatically, all so he could go play with his friends. That, right there, is the birth of automation. But here's the really amazing part. This incredibly complex system, it wasn't designed by some genius king or a government committee. It just happened. So what's the invisible force driving it all? According to Smith, it all stems from a basic part of our human nature. He called it our propensity to truck, barter, and exchange. That's just a fancy 18th century way of saying that humans just love to trade. We're the only species that does it. This natural instinct to make a deal is what gets the whole economic ball rolling. And what fuels that engine of trade? This quote is probably Smith's most famous, and it explains it perfectly. It's self-interest. The baker doesn't bake bread for you because he's a nice guy. He does it to make a living for his own family. But in the process of looking out for himself, he ends up providing you with dinner. It's this beautiful, spontaneous system where everyone, by pursuing their own goals, ends up helping everyone else. Now, there is one big catch. This whole system of hyper-specialization only works if you have enough customers. I mean, you can't have a full-time professional pinhead maker in a tiny village that only needs 50 pins a year, right? As Smith said, the division of labor is limited by the extent of the market. That's why big cities are always the places where you see the most incredible specialization, and, as a result, the most wealth. So, fast forward 250 years. Is any of this still relevant? Yeah, more than ever. We are living in a world that is completely 100% built on this idea. Smith asks us to just consider something as basic as a simple wool coat. Just stop and think for a second about the sheer number of people involved. The shepherd in another country, the people who sorted and dyed the wool, the weavers, the sailors and shipbuilders who transported across the ocean. It's a mind-boggling network of thousands of specialists, all cooperating, most without even knowing the others exist, just to make one simple thing you can buy at a store. That invisible network is what creates everything around us. So, there's no denying it. The division of labor is the engine that created the modern world and pulled billions of people out of poverty. It's incredible. But it leaves us with one final really tough question, one that Smith himself thought about a lot. What is the human cost of a life spent doing one single, repetitive, mindless task? What happens to a person's spirit when their whole world is just making the 18th part of a pen? That's definitely something we're thinking about. Thanks for joining me.